We are in the midst of anticipating a Keir Starmer statement, which we'll bring you as soon as it happens. I'm assuming that Keir Starmer is being forced into this position because we know he doesn't like having to make decisions. We know he doesn't like having to issue statements really at all. But he's been very confused over Gaza, hasn't he?
He has. Well, he's in a terrible predicament because he needs to display to the public that he understands the need to show that the Labour Party is a new Labour, a new Labour Party, cleansed of the stain of anti-Semitism of Jeremy Corbyn. But at the same time, he needs to keep on side all of those elements that continue to exist within the party, who actually hold a very different view to the mainstream. Muslim MPs and those on the...
Has it also not gone now beyond just the people who are in the party? It's now reached out, in fact, to the Muslim community in Britain, because we're told 73%, I think, of the Muslim community votes Labour, and there's 5 million Muslim people living here. So he has to take notice of that, I suppose, as well.
It's very significant. Well, of course, 80% of ethnic minorities tend to vote for the Labour Party. That's one of the reasons that Tony Blair actually opened the doors to mass migration, was to ensure that the Labour Party would have a good electorate in the decades to come. But you're absolutely right. And we've had talk recently of a new Muslim party being established. People are aware of this demographic. And of course, he's conscious of that too. Now, he's actually playing a very good game in terms of the general election because he understands that to become a majority governing party, you need to bring over the centre ground. And the centre ground were very put off by Jeremy Corbyn's clear anti-Semitism in the refusal to condemn Hamas and always having a pro-Palestinian approach. So I think if you're looking at mathematics, actually, this will still work in Labour's favour if Keir Starmer continues down this road. But undeniably, this is a big problem, not so much on the parliamentary level, but on the council level. Because so many councils, particularly in the north of England, are dominated by Muslim Labour councillors.
Right. And here's Sadiq Khan, of course, the Mayor of London, Andy Burnham as well, Anas Sarwar, the leader of Labour in Scotland. They've all called for a ceasefire, as indeed has Humza Yousaf, the leader of the Scottish Parliament, the First Minister of Scotland. But the problem is, he can't really, can he, Keir Starmer, call for a ceasefire under the current circumstances, not while 200 hostages are being held against their will, innocent people, children, elderly individuals, in Hamas.
It's vitally important that after such an atrocious attack, Israel must maintain the right to retaliate. And what gets me, though, is it's fine for people to actually call for a ceasefire, but why aren't those same people calling for Egypt to actually open its borders with Gaza? Because, of course, this open-air prison that we're told exists in Palestine, in Gaza, has one wall with Egypt. And it's the refusal of President el-Sisi to actually allow thousands of Gazans out that may actually lead to the death of many thousands. And it's the hypocrisy there that you never see any mention of Egypt by anybody who's actually calling for a ceasefire.
Well, Egypt came out and said quite starkly, we will not take any Palestinian refugees, as did Jordan. And nobody from the left jumped up and said, you're disgusting fascists, you're just like the Nazis during the Germany of the 1930s. Because if Britain had said that, you can imagine what the outcry would have been.
It's a double standard. It's the refusal to acknowledge the reality on the ground, which is that the Arab states don't want Palestinian refugees for two reasons. One, they don't want to flood Egypt with militant Islamic fundamentalists. That's a major concern. But the other one is, and people need to understand this, the Arab states don't want to depopulate Gaza because by so doing, it will strengthen Israel's hand by having fewer Palestinians there. So what they're doing is they're making the Palestinian people into political pawns, putting their lives on the line in order to advance a political agenda.
Meanwhile, in London, we've got Suella Braverman calling these marches that have been going on, these pro-Palestinian marches, basically hate marches. And I think she's right about that because people that I know who have been on them and who have watched them say, you know, it's a very intimidating atmosphere. If you're Jewish, you don't want to be anywhere near it. Many Jews are saying they don't go anywhere near central London. The Sun this morning is calling for an end to these marches because they say that this is Islamic terrorism, which is basically funding it and making it work. You know, ours is supposedly a moderate liberal country, a safe home for all faiths, says the Sun, including Jews. We will not keep it that way unless we end these years of craven, gullible indulgence towards violent Islamist fascists. And I'm afraid, you know, whichever way you cut it, there might be people on these marches who are just simply, you know, human rights advocates and pro-Palestinian campaigners. But there's an awful lot of people there that are out-and-out supporters of Hamas.
That's exactly right. Look, I'm a free speech fundamentalist, you know, and I believe in the right to protest, and I wouldn't want to ban that. but people have to wake up. Yes, you're quite right. A large number of people on these protests are doing it for noble intentions, but at its core, these protests are fundamentally about hatred of Israel. They're not pro-Palestine. And you can see that clearly in what you're hearing. These calls for jihad, these calls for intifada. Now, my old friend Douglas Murray said a few days ago, he said, London is familiar with intifada. We saw it at London Bridge and Borough Market.
Right.
We saw it at Westminster Bridge.
Yes.
We saw it at 7/7.
Right.
We saw it in Woolwich when Lee Rigby was beheaded.
Yeah.
That's the reality that we're facing here. And unfortunately, many of those people on those marches are useful idiots of the cause if they actually think at its root this is about the creation of Israel. Because Palestinian hatred towards Jews long predates the creation of Israel.
Right.
It goes back...
Sir Keir Starmer there speaking at Chatham House. Rafe Heydel-Mankoo is here with me, historian, a member of the New Culture Forum. Is this Keir Starmer and grown-up politics, possibly? I mean, I'm grateful, I think, and as many people will be, that he hasn't followed the lead of Sadiq Khan and Anas Sarwar and Andy Burnham and Hamza Yusuf, and he said this is not a time for a ceasefire. I think he's absolutely right. He said the war is an issue that so many people recoil from out of despair. Anyone who has followed it closely have seen images that can never be unseen. The innocent dead, Israeli, Palestinian, Muslim and Jew. I think he's finally realised that if he is to be Prime Minister of this country and if he is to give himself an opportunity to do that, he has to be grown up about these things.
That is a potentially prime ministerial speech.
It is.
It could easily have been written for Rishi Sunak to deliver, and there would have been no difference there. I mean, look, he's got a difficult task. He has to ride two horses at the same time, right?
Yes.
He has to convince the majority of the population that the Labour Party isn't dominated by the loony left and by anti-Israel extremists, whilst at the same time placating those who are on the loony left and are extremists, and also a large number of Muslims there. But it was quite sensible because he reassured people that he does understand the right of Israel, but he also tried to placate the other side by saying, look, they don't have a blank check.
Right.
They have to actually ensure...
They have to stay within the law.
They stay within the law. They have to allow suppliers in, and that this is a war against Hamas. It's not a war against the Palestinians. And I think he did a very
I think so. And I think towards the end there, just before we came off that particular speech, I was expecting him to say, which is why I'm now going to call for some kind of pause, humanitarian pause. He hasn't said that yet. He may yet say it. But I think he's set out the stall, really, and there will be some very angry people within the Labour Party, including those Muslim councillors, including some on his front bench who have threatened to resign, including, presumably, Sadiq Khan and the others that I mentioned.
But that's not a bad thing.
No.
Because it's actually that sort of a conflict that will actually seep through to the public psyche. And they'll be able to see that he is actually getting to task with actually doing what needs to be done to reassure people that this is a party ready for government.
Yes.
They have to show that they're competent on the economy, and they have to show that they've basically got their house in order when it comes to extremism within the Labour Party. And I think this speech demonstrates that they know exactly what they're doing.
Well, Stephen Pollard from the Jewish Chronicle, I think last week, wrote a piece in the Daily Mail saying that this issue could be a defining moment for Keir Starmer as to what kind of leader he's likely to be. And if that is the case, I think he's passed the test. But interestingly enough, he then went on to talk about the multicultural nature of Britain, which we were talking about just before he spoke. And I have to say, there will be people listening to that, sitting in their houses in different parts of Britain, Jewish people who will be saying, I'm sorry, I'm not very proud of the multicultural nature of Britain. I'm not very proud of the fact that I can't go into central London on a Saturday anymore because there's a hate speech mob ranting and raving up and down Piccadilly and calling for the extinction of Israel. You know, I think he's got that wrong. I don't think we are seen as a beacon of multiculturalism around the world, are we?
Oh yeah, well, this remains the area where the Labour Party definitely has its head in the sand. That last part of the speech would have been fine in the 1990s or in the 2000s.
Yes.
It's not fit for purpose for the 2020s, unfortunately. You know, the old adage, if you import the world, you import the world's problems.
Well, you've pointed out in the past, Rafe, very, very smartly, that we've had more immigration, I think, in the last 25 years?
The last 25 years.
Than we've had in our entire history.
And in the last 2,000 years.
And that is a very telling statistic.
Yeah, and we get in 1 year more than the entire decade of the 1990s. We get 12 years of the 90s, basically, in 1 year
and
now.
and
no society can actually sustain that.
No.
Can absorb people like that. That's why you're getting segregation growing ever more. And we know from evidence and research, Muslims who live in segregated communities are twice as likely to support radical extremism.
Right. And also, it's not a small number anymore. I mean, we're told there are 5 million Muslim votes out there in this country, which, if there are 5 million Muslim votes, means that there are many more Muslims than 5 million, because not everybody has the vote. Children don't have the vote. So, I mean, you know, this is no longer a small minority of people, in the same way that when, for example, there was a great move from Ireland, from the Republic of Ireland, when people moved to Britain to find work, and they remained here and they stayed here. When Italian people came here, when people came here after the war, when Jewish people came here, you know, it was almost, even during the Windrush generation, you know, it wasn't a very big number of people. Well, so it wasn't as noticeable as it is now.
It's a huge demographic, and we have to say, you know, the majority of Muslims are very, very well integrated, and we must celebrate that. That is a success story. But it's not an overwhelming majority, and that's something which we really need to be adult about. 9% of UK Muslims support terrorism and Islamic fundamentalism.
Yes.
That's over 350,000 people.
Yeah.
Now, 15% sympathise with Islamic fundamentalism, compared with only 6% in France, for example. The most shocking statistic I know is that 1/3 of young Muslims in this country, 16 to 24, believe that anyone who leaves the faith should be put to death. Now, these are astonishing stats, which no one is actually talking about. Now, if people wanted to question my polling on this, I tweeted about this a few days ago. So just go to my Twitter account, and I've got the sources for all of these facts. 23% of Muslims don't believe there's anything called Islamic extremism.
Right.
Only 7% of Muslims believe that Al-Qaeda was behind 9/11. Most of them think it was America or Jews.
Listen, we're going to have to get you back on to explore these numbers more, because that's a fascinating thing you've just told me. Rafe Heydel-Mankoo, thank you very much indeed.